Here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Tian Wei. Open communication between the leaders of China and the United States are very important. Both nations are keen on tackling global issues like inflation, the pandemic, and climate change. And also, recently, there have been a lot of discussion about the inherent value in keeping the lines of communication open. So what is the state of China-U.S. relations now? How to see its immediate future? We are joined by a very strong panel after this. In Washington, D.C., Cheng Li, Director and Senior Fellow of the John Thornton China Center at the Brookings Institution. Dr. Li, what a pleasure to see you. Long time no see.
Same here.
Good to see you.
Same here.
Joining us in Shanghai, Wu Xinbo, Director at the Center for American Studies with Fudan University. In Beijing, last but not least, Rong Ying, Vice President of the China Institute of International Studies. Gentlemen, welcome to all of you. Now, what has been the result of implementation of earlier consensus agreed upon by the two top leaders from both China and United States over the past few months? Professor Wu, would you like to touch on that first briefly?
Well, my impression is that over the past several months, there have been more contacts between two governments. For example, the contact between defense ministers, chief of staff, China State Counselor and U.S. Secretary of State, Director Yang Jiechi, and U.S. National Security Advisor Sullivan. So the engagements between two sides have intensified. But at the same time, with some regret, I would say not much consensus has been reached. And any consensus is important for future cooperation.
I see.
So even though we have more contacts, but we need to make more efforts to reach consensus and as a basis for future cooperation. That's what is.
So let me go to Dr. Cheng Li in Washington. It's been a while that we haven't traveled to Washington, D.C. So besides what's on the surface in the daily news headlines, what actually has been the real steps of implementation or not?
Well, it is disappointing despite some progress, like Wu Xinbo said. And also I see there's more individual visits, including China's environment minister also visited the United States a few weeks ago. And good things is educational and cultural exchanges despite COVID and despite some tensions or deterioration of U.S.-China relations, there's still some Chinese delegation, including a few think tank members come to U.S. and we still receive visiting scholars and students. These are good news. But on the other hand, I think the relationship is certainly still not in good shape. And the trade issue, the tariff issue goes nowhere. And but most importantly, the Taiwan issue, the stake is so high. And I think this should be the major issue for the dialogue, for the conversation today.
Professor Rong, of course, there are a lot on the agenda for the two leaders to handle and also their teams. But to you, what has been the process like over the past few months since the last talk?
Well, I think the process has been quite good, as we have seen the news reports by the latest meeting between State Councilor Wang Yi and Secretary Blinken. And also, I think back in June when Director Yang Jiechi and the NSA Jack Sullivan, if you look at the wording, I think they are talking about a very long sort of a conversation, more than 5 hours, and that all talking about substantive and constructive sort of dialogue. So the process has been good. The result is yet to be sort of in a way that has been reached to the expectations. So I want to know why. Probably there are some distractions, distraction by the Ukraine crisis, distraction by the American very bitter sort of politics, and possibly by the other sort of issues which have to be worked out.
First, Taiwan issue. Dr. Cheng Li, now that has become such a big one with some quite political gestures and hopefully not actions coming from some Washington figures. Now, where is the discussion in Washington in terms of the issue of Taiwan, which China considers as the most crucial?
Well, you're right that certainly despite the Russian-Ukraine war and also American the challenges to U.S. in terms of security and the economy and etc., people in the town still consider China as the most formidable, and the challenge or whether it be rivalry or enemy depend on what the departments or what the institution you are on. But it's a very hawkish atmosphere, and still you see the U.S. Congress, one bill after another. These are all wanted to exert more pressure and more restriction, more sanctions against China, despite the U.S. economy is really in a very, very delicate situation. Most economists believe that there will be recession next year. And also the inflation reached a 40 years high. And also the Ukraine-Russia war, and many people are actually more concerned about that. That explains the Biden's approval rate is still going down.
Yeah.
But now you see the lack of coordination on the Taiwan policy. On one hand, the administration just wanted to hold that continue that one China policy, but at the same time, you see some of the moves Chinese interpreted that they crossed the red line. But the point is that the atmosphere, but two countries have different perspective. China certainly thinks U.S. violated, with particularly U.S. Congress and politicians, including the Speaker, violated one China policy, really put China into a corner, and this enhanced the danger of a military confrontation. But the White House still believes that they do not change one China policy. They interpret it is because of the tensions in the region and because of China's coercive policy. So two sides have the different perspective, different view. I hope this summit will at least try to find a way to deal with crisis, particularly incidents, if happen in the coming days or weeks.
Putting rhetorics aside, of course, Professor Wu, what do you see are some of the most important and incremental steps that both sides seem to gesture to one another regarding the issue of Taiwan?
Well, I think one thing is that the Biden administration continues to provide support to Taiwan and also exert pressure on China on the Taiwan issue by inviting its allies and friends to join the U.S. camp. On the other hand, I think China has also stepped up its efforts to resist the pressure from the United States and trying to control the situation in the Taiwan Strait. One thing is quite clear at the moment. I think neither side, Beijing or Washington, wants a direct conflict over the Taiwan Strait at the moment. So that's important if two sides can manage the current challenge, the so-called planned visit by Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan. So I think that provides the basis for two sides to discuss how to avoid a forthcoming crisis. Right. Because Biden already said he wants to build the guardrails for competition with China. And the Taiwan issue is the issue that is most likely to invite a conflict between two sides. Now, the Pelosi visit is a test whether Biden has the political will or the capability to manage U.S. domestic politics as well as U.S. relations with China. So I think this is really a test of credibility when he made some positive statements about the relations with China. That's way to say.
From now until the midterm election, Dr. Cheng Li, it's very hard to predict the U.S. Domestic politics, at least from this side of the world. Now, how do you see that is playing its key role in the latest fanfare about the issue of Taiwan?
Well, you see that Nancy Pelosi is the same party with President Biden, and you will guess probably there's some coordination, but they're not. I think Biden made it very clear he opposed that visit. He also used the the reason that the DOD and think that this is dangerous. But at the moment that Nancy still plans to that. But of course, it's not 100%. There's always a chance that for some reason and for some of the kind of coordination may change. But at the moment, it's more still very likely. But the point is the Republican and the Capitol Hill, including both parties, that they play the game to compete who is tougher on China, because at the moment there's related with election, related with the Americans' own problem, domestic problem, economy, security, politics, and even foreign policy. So that they want to show, at least in this area, there's a consolidation and the solidarity. But the point is, many scholars and also many people in both parties have some concerns, have the reservation, because they put the U.S. in a very dangerous situation, and particularly fighting a war with China over Taiwan. It's a very, very serious matter. Particularly at the same time, you also engage a war or tensions in Europe. So that's the things that I think deserve more debate in Washington. But unfortunately, that debate is still very weak.
Professor Rong, from your perspective, how dangerous is it to use this bottom line as a bargaining chip?
Indeed, it is a very dangerous and provocative way by the United States. Whoever he or she is, I think from Chinese perspective, they are Americans. They are sort of challenging, they are undermining China's core interest, and they are going against the commitment and the principles that has been underpin the relationship and undermine the peace and stability in the region. This is a very irresponsible way, I mean, for these politicians because out of its own personal agenda.
All right. Another issue, of course, a lot of this has to do with the economy. As we know, for an election year, nothing can be compared to the importance of the economy, but usually politicians decorate it as if there are other priorities, particularly when the economy is not doing very well. Dr. Chen Li, on that, I want to ask you, inflation, of course, big problems, latest coming out numbers suggesting maybe the U.S. is already in the middle of a recession, even though the Fed chairman refused to admit that, suggesting, what about the job rates? It is still up. But having said that, Dr. Li, tell me more about, from the economic perspective, how much important it is for U.S. and China to work together, or to U.S. to seek the coordination of China?
Well, certainly that even before Biden got the presidency, he talked about when he become president, he will quickly reverse or lift the tariff against China, but it did not happen. And at the moment, he and some members of his cabinet, including the Treasury Secretary and Commerce Secretary, and these are minorities. They talk about this could help to U.S. to deal with the #1 problem, which is inflation. But even that kind of easy issue sounds like a really win-win for both countries. You still cannot go through, and at least that there's no chance for completely lift the tariff, maybe only partially, but even partially will go through 90 days review by the Congress, and a lot of interest group, and including American labor working group, that working class people, they will have a lot of concern, because the narrative in the United States is that trade with China will not help American working class. This is certainly a distorted view, but because of this, the cooperative America do not want to lobby or be more aggressive. But let me also put it that way, that the tariff is one issue, because you look at some other issues like economic sanction against China and the various laws, and it's already become law to restrain the trade with the products from Xinjiang and etc. And also yesterday passed some technology and chips. These are exert more pressure and more sanctions against the Chinese companies. So for Chinese perspective, of course, they want to lift the tariff because it's a win-win, but at the same time, even that resolved, you still do not deal with the economic issue. But for China, and also maybe for both China and United States, that the security and the politics is far more important their economic at the moment, unfortunately.
Let's also have a voice coming from the United States in Philadelphia. Join us now, Nathan Mahboubi, research scholar at the Center of the Study of Contemporary China from University of Pennsylvania. Mr. Mahboubi, good to see you. Finally, we got linked to you. Good to hear your voice. Let me hear your thoughts also on the significance, actually, China-United States working together on the economic and trade issues. Remember 2008 global financial crisis, these two countries did hold their hands together with other economies as well.
Sure. Jumping in a little bit later in the conversation, although I did catch my friend and colleague Chang Li's comments just now, I'm very happy you mentioned the 2008 financial crisis, because I think about that often, about the degree to which the U.S. and China were able to work together in a very productive way back then. And one does wonder if there was something similar that happened today, whether the two countries would be able to have anything like that kind of beneficial working relationship in the face of economic danger like the one that we faced back in 2008. What I'm most concerned about right now is the rhetoric on both sides. I think that the rhetoric on both sides has really poisoned the relationship. And even though I think there are people, including in the business community, including more broadly, who think that there are ways in which, notwithstanding all these differences, the two sides can continue to have at least a beneficial economic relationship, I think the rhetoric is making that quite difficult. And so beyond anything specific to tariffs or anything like that, what I'm very keen to find ways to encourage is to tamp down the rhetoric on both sides that is making things so difficult right now.
That certainly is a great wish, but I really wonder whether that's realistic or not. Professor Wu from Shanghai.
Well, we have to realize that there is a fundamental shift in the U.S. With regard to China policy. On the one hand, with strategic competition being set as the overall framework for the relation with China, so the U.S. policymakers tend to view relation with China more and more from a security perspective rather than from an economic perspective. At the same time, the Biden administration has cared a lot about its relations with the labor union. So because of that, they tend to be more protectionist. And this is why it has been so hesitant and cautious in dealing with the Trump tariff. So both on the security front and on the economic front, the trends are kind of, not favoring improving economic ties with China. So that is also why the U.S. business community have felt very frustrated with the Biden administration. They used to have some expectation on the Biden administration, but 1 year and a half into the presidency, it has not done anything substantive in normalizing economic relations with China.
There has been quite some research by the U.S. business community over the past 1 year or two about if China, where are the markets for them that has the much potential as China would have for the future. Now, the answer relatively is almost that there's nothing yet to compare to what China could bring to the American business community. Having said that, though, Professor Rong, also invite your views on the economic prospect about the China-U.S. relations and being the leaders and the important, responsible parties of the international community, largest economies of the world, the top two. How much important it is for the two to work together now as we are all struggling from the fallout of the pandemic and the economic possibly recession and crisis?
Well, economy and the trade relations between China and the United States used to be the ballast and the driver for the bilateral relationship, which has always been difficult, complex, and important. Unfortunately, as the two previous speakers, the co-panelists have been said, that things have been changed so much in a way, I think, from the U.S. perspective, that they feel that it is not only has changed totally, but to the sense that they would like to pursue a different way to punish China and at the expenses of even punishing itself. So this is, I think, certainly not in the economic sense. The question, as the previous speaker said, they are now over-securitizing, politicizing the issues.
Yeah.
And this is out of the fact, at least from China's perspective, it's out of the fact that the United States is losing confidence to compete with China. It's
Right.
very anxious and worried about China, which I think the past history, if is a mirror, tells that the relationship, economic trade relationship, has always been mutually beneficial and has always been playing an important role.
Despite that, in fact, the bilateral trade has been doing very well. It seems that the business community want to look away from the politics. It seems that consumers on both sides want to know what is more important for their lives. There's a lot of things that make sense in this relationship if you throw away this geopolitics and also politics. So let me talk about those things that really are making sense, the people-to-people relations, the cultural exchanges. These used to be cliche things, people are just saying, oh yeah, those phrases. But these now are really the things that combine the two together, bring the two together. I was watching some latest American movies on the big screen here in Beijing before coming into our studio today. It is shown here. And also, look at the students, Chinese students traveling to the United States, gentlemen. These ties are so crucial. How are we doing on these ties, Dr. Li?
Well, excellent point. I think that the summit and this kind of conversation by heads of the state give us opportunity to remind us there's some common shared interests, whether it be the need for global economic financial stability. And also, I don't think China and the United States, really want to have a war, this kind of devastating war. No, we don't want. But also that we still deal with COVID. And also that there's a shared concern about the possibility of a shortage of food and also the famine in Africa. I think this is an opportunity to build up some goodwill, and certainly people-to-people contact still going on. I think they should continue to promote. At the end of the day, we are similar people, but some people in both sides, particularly in Washington at the moment, try to demonize China to create this kind of bifurcation or confrontation or return to Cold War. This definitely should be avoided. I think Biden said, I'm glad he said recently, we don't want to go back to the Cold War. It's not like that. But at the same time, he should really make a clear case. On the one hand, legitimate coalition building with American allies, but not go to the extreme to see the real two blocs and point China as the head of the other bloc. That, I think, does not serve American interests, does not serve many countries in today's world.
Mr. Mahboubi.
Yes.
So first of all, I think it's very important to emphasize that neither side really wants to go into a major confrontation. So we have a common agreement on that, and yet there are dynamics that are pushing in that direction that both sides are having trouble getting out of. And so the question is, how do we get out of these dynamics leading to a point that nobody wants? Now, one thing could be these leader-leader calls, and sure, that's helpful, but that's not nearly enough. It's not sufficient to just have these calls between Presidents Biden and Xi. We do need that economic relationship that has been the ballast for so long, but to go to your main point here, we definitely need those people-to-people ties that have been so beneficial over the past 20, 30, 40 years. And this is a point that I've been very vocal about. I think it is absolutely essential to have Americans in particular start coming back to China in the numbers that they were before. I think it is incredibly important. And I think on this particular point, the main obstacle right now is China's COVID mitigation strategies. And I understand that there are reasons for that, and I understand that before the party Congress, it's unlikely to see much change in that. But until those things are lessened, and until more Americans are able to go back in the way that many of us, including myself, have done for many, many decades, I think that's going to be losing a very, very helpful factor for keeping us away from that bad case scenario that nobody wants.
Professor Wu.
Well, first of all, as a university professor, nobody likes to see more American students come to study in China than I do. It has been several years that American students have not been sitting in my class, mainly because of COVID. But I guess this will change soon. My concern is that now, because of changing political atmosphere in the United States, that has made some American students hesitant to come to study China, and that's something we have to work out. In the recent to-do list presented by Wang Yi to the U.S. side, we proposed 8 areas of cooperation, including climate change, public health, people-to-people exchanges. So I think the two teams on both sides are working on some of those issues. So in the short term, I hope there will be some improvement that will allow more American students and scholars coming to China. And the second thing is that this is a time that high politics is always difficult when we talk about security strategy. However, if we start from the low politics, just as we have mentioned some of them, people-to-people exchanges, public health, and the exchanges between local governments on both countries, maybe that's something we can start to work out after this summit. So in the next several months, I want to see some incremental steps taken in the right direction as two leaders. They focus more and more on their domestic politics, and we both need to improve these relations as much as we can.
And Professor Rong, also your thoughts on that?
Well, I think certainly to some extent the COVID-19 has caused quite a lot of inconvenience and disruption in terms of people-to-people interactions, which is very important. But I think from Chinese perspective, the cases, even though some of them are isolated cases, that the Chinese, particularly Chinese students, were treated unfairly on the suspicion or unfounded sort of suspicions of sparring and others. And some students from Sunny universities are blacklisted as such, give the impression that even though the normalcy comes back in the wake of the COVID-19, I think we'll be left with an impression that the United States might be an unwelcome place for Chinese or in particular Chinese students. So that is something I think we may have to think about and find a way to address if we're really serious about that.
All right. We have less than 1 minute. I want to have one sentence only, gentlemen, from every one of you. What do you think is the most urgent thing to do right now for China and the U.S. if we don't want to push these two countries into crisis? Dr. Li.
Well, I just want to add one thing on the people-to-people side. Someone mentioned about
very briefly.
We should wait
very
for the
briefly.
party
We
Congress.
have less than 30 seconds.
I think before the party Congress, China should open up the people-to-people exchanges and the tourism. Before the party Congress,
Professor
not
Rong,
after.
one sentence, please.
Well, I think we need more communications, more conversations based on mutual respect.
All right. Mr. Mahboubi.
As soon as possible, have Americans be able to go back to China without having to quarantine, without those COVID restrictions, so we can redo the people-to-people exchange once again.
All right. I guess it's not just that, right? People-to-people exchange for what? That will be a lot of other questions to be answered. Last but not least, Professor Wu, we have 10 seconds left.
Taiwan issue. We should try to avoid a crisis on Taiwan issue, which is very important.
Time is so limited for a gigantic topic like China-U.S. relations, but I want to thank all of you for joining us at this critical moment. Cheng Li and also Nathan Mahboubi, Wu Xinbo, Rong Ying. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us. All the best. That's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search our YouTube and check out our Facebook and Twitter as well. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for being with us. Bye for now.